grateful and very honored and very happy to be with all of you this evening. Thank you to Vivek and family for opening the doors of your beautiful home for all of us. Could everyone hear? I asked what I should speak about this evening, and Vivek gave me a topic. Recognizing the divinity in everyone. Yes? And how to bring out the best in others. I just got this topic on the way in the car. There is a beautiful verse in Bhagavad Gita. It is in the 5th chapter. Vidyavanaya sampane brahmani vari kavihastini suni chaiva swapake cha pandita samadarshana. I remember when I was young, growing up as a teenager in the 1960s in America. It was a time of a lot of social conflict. And I was really searching for answers. On the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, there is a verse from the Old Testament inscribed, which essentially says that in this land all beings are given equal liberty. But I saw people of African American descent practically prisoners in the ghetto. And I remember reading that after America got its independence from Britain, 1/6 of the population was African descent. And they were all slaves. And I even read this summer. It's there at the Liberty Bell. There's a exhibition. And it explains that there was a law in America. The Constitution says all men are created equal and liberty and justice for all. But at that time, there was a law. It was a crime to murder another person's slave. That means your own slave. It wasn't a crime because they were your property. And we were sensitive to these things in the 1960s because we saw that there really was not freedom. Freedom was selective, according to one's religion, according to the color of one's skin, according to one's particular social status. So I became very active in the civil rights movement. And of course, so many of my uncles and aunts were killed by the Nazis in Europe because of their religion. So why is there so much hate and discrimination on the basis of these external differences between people? And I was demonstrating. I became a member of the counterculture, which is a sophisticated name for the hippie movement. And I was marching, and I was getting tear gassed by the police, and I thought it was for such a high, noble cause. But I heard the words of Gandhi, that we should be the change we want to see in the world. And I was more and more beginning to believe that. I went for a summer vacation. It's described in this book I wrote, The Journey Home, to Europe with a friend between semesters of college. And I was supposed to come back in August, but I never came back. And in England, I was at a rock festival called the Isle of Wight. And there was a musician named Jimi Hendrix who played. And I was just outside of London a few days after that, and I saw in the newspaper that he was dead from an overdose of drugs. I was thinking, this man was a millionaire, and he had so much popularity and so much talent, and any pleasure he wanted was at his disposal. But he wasn't happy. So really, what am I looking for? And I understood more and more that unless we find something deep and rich in values and purpose and meaning within ourselves, we can't really contribute so much of real good to the world. And then I found this verse while I was traveling through India from the Bhagavad Gita. I recited at the beginning. The translation is, true wisdom is to see all beings with equal vision. Whether one is a high priest or a simple householder, or whether one is black or white or red or yellow or brown, whatever one's religion, whatever one's social status, whether one is a human or an elephant or a cow or a dog or a cat, wherever there's life, it is sacred. And when we understand the sacredness within ourselves, we could recognize that sacredness in others. And if we cannot see it in another being, it's because we haven't found it within ourselves. And from my studies of various religions, philosophies, and spiritual paths, the essence is that, to actually uncover the true nature of oneself. That the living force, the Atma, or the soul, is divine. It's a part of God, and it's godly by nature. But due to the ahankar, the false ego, like a cloud that covers the beautiful light of the sun of our true nature, we become so complicated and implicated in distractions. We're constantly being bombarded by weapons of mass distraction. It is said that in a evolved human society, people love people and use things. But unfortunately, in the world we live, so often people love things, and they use people to get them or to keep them. That can give some very temporary, superficial, shallow sense of satisfaction to the mind and senses. But it can give no satisfaction to the heart. Because the heart is seeking only one thing: to be loved and to love. And when we don't have that, then no matter what else we have, it's not going to really give us lasting pleasure. I'll tell a story about Kansas. That reminds me of other stories, actually. Just this last September, I was in Denver, Colorado. And I was staying at someone's house, and some of my very dear friends came from Kansas. They live near Lawrence, Kansas, and they have a farm. And this girl, she brought her children, she's a lady, and she brought some pumpkins. I guess squash. And this particular squash was a big squash. It was about this big, and it was shaped kind of like a club. It was, and then it gets big like that. And she brought these pumpkins to this family to cook, for me, I guess. And they had this little boy, and he saw that pumpkin and just started playing with the pumpkin. And he was having so many creative games. He was playing all day with that pumpkin, and he was really enjoying. Sometimes he was riding it like a horse, and other times he was like using it as a club to, beat up, invisible people. And sometimes he was rolling on it, and sometimes he was using it like a typewriter. He was doing so many things with this pumpkin, and he was completely fascinated by it. And I was there for 3 days. And whenever we weren't out doing something with the child, he was just with this pumpkin. Now, a few months before that, I was at the home of the daughter of one of my dear friends in Illinois. And her and her husband are extremely wealthy. But in order to make the wealth and sustain the wealth, they both work a lot. And they have a son who is about the same age. And he took me down to his basement. It's a big house. And he had every kind of toy you can imagine. And some of them were really high tech. They were computerized toys and pinball machines and games and weapons. There was definitely thousands and thousands, if not tens and thousands of dollars worth of playthings. And the reason there's so many is he would play with it for a while, and then he would get tired of it, and he would just be really obnoxious. I want something else, I want something else. And they'd have to get him something else, and he'd play with that, and he'd get tired with it. I want something else. Because his parents, they gave him all things, but they didn't have time to give him the attention, the affection, and the love he wanted, so he couldn't be satisfied with anything. But this other little boy, because he was given the affection he needed, he was completely blissful with a pumpkin, which didn't cost anything, it just grew. And according to true spiritual tradition, the origin of that propensity to love and be loved that's within our heart is to feel God's love and to love God. God has many names, as has appeared throughout history. The Srimad Bhagavatam, one great scripture of India, describes when you water the root of a tree, the water naturally extends to every part of the tree. The root, the flowers, the twigs, the leaves, the branches. And similarly, when you put food in the stomach, it goes to every organ, every cell of your body, the nutrients and the energy. So similarly, when we learn to love God, because everything is connected to God, it's the root of all existence. Janmadya Shagyataha, the cause of everything that exists, the mother and the father of all living beings. We can't love God and not love everyone. We may not love what people do, but we see that the person is beyond that cloud of whatever distractions may be there. Life is sacred. To recognize that is evolved consciousness. Just recently I had a really nice, it was for me, I'm just a little person, but it was very special. I was invited on January 26th. That's Republic Day in India. The President of India, Pranab Mukherjee, I was invited to his palace, the Rastriya Bhavan, Rashtrapati Bhavan. And he was doing a reception for Michelle Obama and Barack Obama. And Narendra Modi and everyone was there. So there was just a couple hundred people there. And it was in the back garden. So I was like about this far away from all the people. There was Sonia Gandhi and there was Manmohan Singh and all the ministers of the government and Barack Obama and Narendra Modi and all of the other people like that. And we all stood and they played the national anthem. There was military bands. People were receiving each other. And a bird flew overhead. And I looked up at that bird, and it kind of looked like the bird was looking at me. And I was a little touched by that. He wasn't looking at the president, he was looking I was thinking that that bird, there's a person looking through the eyes of that bird, looking down, and there's a person in my body looking through my eyes, looking up. And the living force, the Atma, the soul in that bird, is a child of God, just like me. And just like the Prime Minister and the President and all these other people. Some of them were in power, some of them were not in power. I was thinking the bird can't rule over a country. But these people ruling over the country can't fly in the sky. So God has given everyone a certain place. And the sacredness of life is there in both. And it wasn't that this realization was bringing down the distinction of the prime ministers or the presidents. It was actually bringing up. And bringing up the bird. Life is sacred. The potential of that divinity of life itself is so important to understand. If we can't see it within ourselves, we can't see it anywhere. And if we don't see it anywhere, it means we don't see it within ourselves. In the Bible, Lord Jesus, he spoke that what profiteth a man that gains the whole world but loses his immortal soul? That's a universal truth. To understand God's love for us and to be an instrument of that love through whatever we do, whether we're mothers or fathers or teachers or bankers or politicians or farmers or software engineers or swamis. Whatever our role may be in society, the true happiness that we can feel and give is in being an instrument of that grace, that love that is within us. And it's not our love, it's God's love. And that's something so beautiful. When my guru, Srila Prabhupada, came to the West, he came in 1965 actually. This year is the 50th anniversary of when he left the King George dockyard in Calcutta on a cargo ship and sailed 38 days to New York City. And he had 40 rupees, which was then equal to $7. But he couldn't change it because no one wanted rupees in those days. But he was living in New York, and he didn't know but he wanted to give something very special to people. He wanted to give the love that he had discovered within himself. And he started a little storefront and made it into a temple in the Lower East Side. And then in 1967, some of his students brought him to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. And he started a little storefront there. And he lived there. And there was a journalist who came to interview him. And at one point said, "Swamiji, why have you come here?" And he said, "I have come to remind you what you have forgotten. That you're a child of God. That there's happiness, there's love within yourself. It needs to be uncovered. And that's the purpose of all religions, of all spiritual paths. To be an instrument of that love in whatever we do." And the journalist said, "But there's so many hippies here." He said, "Swamiji, what is a hippie?" And this is an American journalist. And Srila Prabhupada was at that time a 73-year-old sadhu from Vrindavan, from a holy place in India. So when he said, "What is a hippie?" Prabhupada said, "You know better than me." And then Prabhupada said, "Something extraordinary." And then the person says, "You are from India? You're a yogi? Can you show me a miracle?" Prabhupada said, "My miracle is I have made hippies into happies." And how did he make hippies into happies? Because he saw something in us that we didn't know existed. Many of these people were coming and they were addicted to drugs, and they were in a whole culture of free sex, and they were in a culture of revolting against practically any moralities or values. And Prabhupada said, and most of them didn't even bathe. And he was seeing that there's something very beautiful and divine within them. You're a child of God. That makes you divine. You have the potential to do such beautiful, wonderful things within this world if you just tap into your own potential. And because he saw it in us, people who are just looking everywhere for everything and revolting against everything because they just saw so much hypocrisy about among people who had everything that everybody was trying to get. It's really a time of revolution, anarchy. But he was seeing something so good within them. That you're a child of God. Love for God is within you. Peace is within you. Compassion is within you. The true testament of an enlightened state, as we heard from that verse, is compassion toward all beings. Equal vision means compassion. Paradukadukhi. The golden rule in the Bible is to do unto others as you want them to do to you. And in the Sanskrit literatures of India, it says paradukadukhi. An enlightened person is one who other people's suffering is my suffering, and other people's happiness is my happiness. When we're not obsessed, when we're actually feeling satisfied, when we're actually feeling a certain liberation, then we're not looking for happiness. We're seeking ways to share happiness, to make others happy. That's compassion. So he was seeing in these people something so beautiful. And because we could feel it, yes, he sees that I'm something very special, I'm something very valuable, I must be. By his compassion to us, he actually gave us faith that we could find that within ourselves. And take to a spiritual process by which it could be uncovered. Not in a sectarian way, but in a very genuine way. So when I saw that little bird flying overhead, I was wondering if, because sometimes birds, drop things. Because I was so enlightened by just seeing the equality, essentially, of the bird and everyone, on the rest of us, as far as, of course, not equality as far as our capacity of what we could do in the world, but the equality of life. I was thinking it would really be a dramatic conclusion to the story if the bird left his mark on one of these people. but he didn't. I can't make that part up. But really, leadership is about bringing the good out in others. But we can't bring it out unless we see it. I think last time I was here, I was telling about my favorite teacher when I went to high school. Because when I went to high school, it was a really conservative kind of school, where the popular person was like the best football player. And I was kind of like that, but then This, it didn't make sense to me. So I grew my hair long and became kind of radical. And none of my teachers liked that. So they were, and the subjects they were trying to teach me really didn't interest me very much because I had so many idealistic thoughts of how to change the world. But I had one teacher who just saw so much good in me and actually really took me by surprise. He really liked me and he really encouraged me. Others would chastise me, he encouraged me. And actually he changed me a lot. And to this day, I thank him. That was 1968, when he was my teacher. I was a senior in high school. Because he saw something good and brought it out. And this is so much the beauty of parenthood and of leadership and on every level. And there are so many stories of saintly people who saw good in others, even crooks and thieves, and somehow or other, by seeing that and reminding them and giving value to that in a person, it transformed them. Of course, justice is required in a world, but prevention is the best justice. And the best way to prevent is to actually educate people in values, in universal values, and to remind people that those values are inherent within themselves. I think that's the topic you wanted me to speak about. The first time I met Vivek, within 5 minutes we were lifelong friends. Because somehow he read this book, The Journey Home, and it's about different religious people and sadhus that I met between 1970 and 72, 73. And there were so many I was meeting because I was traveling through the Himalayas and through the different holy places of India. And almost everyone I met, he lived with. And he was telling me, they would all come to meet your father. And some of these people nobody knew anything about, but he knew. Yeah. So it's a very special connection. Thank you. And I'm so grateful. Your friends are always such beautiful, special people.